For this end of year update, I'm just going to plot myself in front of the camera and talk for a bit about the past year and the little health scare I had just a few days ago. Now, I've got my cup of coffee, and this honestly feels kind of like the most YouTuber thing I could do, sitting in a kind of awkward location. I'm on the floor right now in front of a bed, but it's very messy, so it's more my aesthetic. I've got the my camera backpack just kind of flopped behind me, and we're just gonna roll with it and give this here a little update with lukewarm coffee. Anyway, before we get to the exciting health update, I don't know if exciting is the right word, but we will also roll with that. Now, I thought to do this YouTube retrospective because recently on my Instagram I posted a little reel that was looking back at some of my travels for the past year, travels, running adventures, that kind of thing. And I think that was kind of healthy for me because I do have the tendency to, in the moment, think that I'm not doing enough. And I've certainly felt like that over the past couple of months, especially over this holiday season when I'm not traveling. And then coupled with the health scare I'll talk about in a little bit, I've had to slow down a lot. But looking back starting in January of this year, going through the rest of the year, I'm like, oh, wow, I have not been sedentary. And I do hope to continue moving around in 2024. So in this video, I'm going to start in January, go through the months, talk about some of the stuff I've did. I also wanted to do this because I've only relatively recently started to take YouTube more seriously and kind of see that as a path forward for me. So this is also, I guess, an introduction of sorts for some folks who might be new to the channel of some of the stuff I've done before. So if there's something that I talk about in this video that you're like, oh, I did not know about that, I would like to watch that video, well, it's there. It's on my channel. Just go look for it. So I'll take another sip of lukewarm coffee, keep my phone up so I can try to remember what I was doing month by month. So first up in January, I was having a little bit of itchy feet syndrome, itchy foot syndrome. Sounds disgusting, but basically it just means for me that I was really wanting to get out of Berlin and go do something. I've said it before, I won't, kvetch about it for too long, but Berlin is not my favorite place to be in the winter. Very dark, gray, not the greatest weather, and it's mostly the darkness that gets me, starting to get dark around 30:30, dark by 4, not my favorite. And although I had my big trip of the year on the horizon in late February and March, I wanted to book something that was kind of short and sweet and would remind me that the sun existed. And that's what I did by going to Sicily. And I was looking at a few places back in January, and I picked Sicily because it felt rather serendipitous that I was listening to a podcast at the gym and heard somebody talking about how supposedly Palermo had the world's best cannoli. And that's something I could kind of latch onto in terms of like a story. I could go out to Palermo and find the world's best cannoli. And that's precisely what I did. And I had a wonderful time in Palermo going through the street food market and having supposedly the world's best cannoli. But then I was also able to couple that with a trip across the island to Syracuse, where I ended up getting to do a little bit more of what's my bread and butter, talking about Jewish food, and learned about caponata, the Jewish food history, and just the Jewish history of Sicily in and of itself, and do a little bit of storytelling around that. And that was a lot of fun. And that kind of like fed my mission or purpose-based traveling need in January before I went off and did something bigger in February. That said, my itchy feet are such a problem that even in February, I got to February, my trip to Vietnam, Laos, and Bangkok was just around the corner, and still I felt like I needed to go do something. This was partly my wife's fault. I will throw under the bus because she got to do a fun trip skiing in, I guess, probably the Alps in Austria on a little girl's trip. And I was like, I want to go do something outside in nature. So I kind of forced myself off my ass and threw myself over to the Harz Mountains in Germany and just did a nice long weekend in Ultramarathon and climbed up the Brocken Mountain, which was actually my second time doing that. And I'm not sure how to describe what this trip did for me, but it definitely made me mentally feel better and also reminded me, we have a lot of stuff right in Germany that I can just take the train to, and I actually hope to be doing more in that in 2024. But then, end of February, came the big trip of the year to Hanoi, Vietnam, starting there. And that was, it's Hanoi, it's Vietnam. And I was just so excited to have pho in Hanoi for the first time that everything else was just kind of a marvelous bonus and like truly marvelous. I really can't think of anything that I disliked about that trip. That was truly, once in a lifetime kind of stuff. Although selfishly, I hope it's not once in a lifetime for me. I hope to go back and do more traveling in Vietnam because I did limit myself to just a couple stops in the north, and also, you know, I don't want to say I'm certainly not old, but I'm not in that like early 20s mode where I want to just, spend, 24 hours in each place to kind of cross off as many things as possible. I'm fine, in a week being in two, max three places and kind of soaking all of that in. And that's basically what we did in Vietnam. We had some time in Hanoi, and then we went down to Ninh Binh, where I did a little motorbiking, which is totally out of character for me. If you know me, you know I'm not really into vehicles of any kind unless it's a train, and certainly not cars. So I kind of thought like, motorbiking wouldn't be my thing. But in the countryside, it was actually a lot of fun. And once we got over to Laos, I did a little bit more of it and actually ended up quite liking it. If there were a camera that could show how I was feeling in the moment, you would probably see me be a bit more nervous than perhaps conveyed on camera. But if you have the opportunity to go motorbiking in Southeast Asia, for some reason that just feels like the place to do it. And especially in Laos, motorbiking feels like one of the best ways to see the countryside. But I can say that as well for Ninh Binh, Vietnam. Being on a motorbike was it's you can be on not busy roads, feel comfortable with it, but kind of really experience the countryside while still moving at a pace that's not going to, jive too much with traffic. Whereas, if you're cycling on a bike, you might get blown by quite a bit by traffic, and that's not as fun. Although you can do some cycling in Ninh Binh as well, and we did around some temples, and highly recommend that as well. So February and March were definitely highlights of the year, especially getting to Laos. Laos had been something I was especially looking forward to try to make a long story short. I didn't know much about Laos until an old high school friend of mine who had been teaching English in China reached out and shared some of his travels around the area and mentioned that I had to check out Si Falls if I ever got the chance. So, I added the little Google Maps green flag way back when and kind of forgot about it, to be honest, until years later, pandemic goes by, a couple more years, and we're planning, where do we want to go for our big trip in 2022. Vietnam had always been up there, but then I thought about Laos, and Laos is like one of those places where, at least coming from the US, we don't know a whole lot about the country, which is unfortunate given we have some awful, just objectively awful history in the region, and we should know more about it. And I'm drawn to those places like El Salvador, um, Jordan was another example of that, and Tunisia maybe a little bit would fall into that bucket of just places that the average American might be a little wary of, and I would argue unfairly wary of. And Laos was probably on that list a little bit, though I don't know if people would necessarily be quote unquote afraid of it. They would just not know anything and not know what to expect. And I was drawn to that, and I heard great things about Luang Prabang, the city near Si Falls. So I was wildly giddy when that trip came up, and it did not disappoint, even though I had a little health scare there too. Hope I'm not making myself sound wildly sickly, but it was actually similar to what happened recently. But again, I'll get to that later. But although I had my little health scare, I recovered pretty quickly and was able to then take the train down to Vang Vieng and had a great rest of the trip. Did a rice wine hike. I also want to mention that in Luang Prabang, that with Kiri Travel, well, both in Luang Prabang and Van Vien, did a couple of experiences with them. In Luang Prabang, basically went to a rice farm for a day and saw how rice is produced, how integral that is for Laotian communities and just for the cuisine, and how the rice farm is trying to give back to the local community using those tourist dollars wisely. And then in Van Viang, they had a rice wine hike and got to see the kind of less um, glossy parts of tourism in the area. Unfortunately, it does sound like there's some overdevelopment on the horizon for Van Viang, and tour guide talked about that. So if you want to go watch the Van Viang video, you can learn more about that. So that's unfortunate. but I appreciate having the opportunity to hear those stories firsthand and share them for hopefully a wider audience. Then the little Southeast Asia excursion ended in Bangkok, which ironically is the first city that I visited outside of North America in my entire life. And people are usually surprised to hear that. Um, and even Canada, I'd been to Canada just gently crossing the border into Guelph, Ontario for my older brother's Little League tournament team baseball games. And so that was my first international experience. I did do a little bit of traveling with my family into Quebec and Montreal and have vague memories of it when I was a lot younger. But for the most part, I had done zero international travel until I was in college and signed up for a study abroad experience in northern India, which included, for reasons I'm not actually sure of, but it included some time in Bangkok on the way out there. And so that was my first time anywhere outside of North America and the United States. That was back in, I want to say like 2008, so a long time ago. So it was nice to go back to Bangkok as an adult, not have my hand held the entire time by teachers and chaperones and whatnot, and do some of the touristy things that my wife hadn't seen yet, but also trying something different. And the different for me was doing this cooking class in a part of the city I had never been to, didn't know anything about, and felt like a kind of local market where actually people who live in Bangkok go to. I don't think I saw any tourists to speak of other than those who were in our small group. And then we went back to the host place for a little cooking class and got to make pad thai, which I've eaten obscene amounts of. So I guess it's nice that I now know how to make it. So then in early March, the Southeast Asia trip is over and we're back in Berlin, but not for too long because at the end of 2022, we booked a trip to Israel and Palestine, which feels bonkers to talk about now considering everything that's going on. But I had found some distant relatives that live in Israel and became pretty friendly with one of them, exchanging a lot of messages. And she offered to host us, said you should really come out sometime. And I'm curious about just about anywhere in the world. So Israel and Palestine would certainly be on that list. And we talked about several times, okay, we're coming definitely on these dates. And then inevitably something would happen in world news that would kind of scare us away from it. But then strangely, I would talk to other people who would say, oh, yeah, I mean, things happen that we get in world news, but like when you're on the ground, then you don't really notice anything too much. Perhaps that's changed given everything that's happened since October 7th. If I'm honest, there was something in my gut that said if we don't go soon, we might not have the opportunity to go for a long time because it doesn't seem like things are going to cool down there anytime soon. And this was at the end of 2022 that I had this feeling. So we booked a trip, committed to going unless just something catastrophic happened. And so then that's what we did in April and into early May. We started the trip in Tel Aviv, had this wonderful food market tour in the Carmel market with delicious Israel, heard all kinds of stories from people whose roots are to Israel are relatively recent and those who have roots in the region for long before statehood in 1948. And then from Tel Aviv, went to Jerusalem. Again, another phenomenal food tour. And actually, this market, the Machane Yehuda market, might be one of my favorite culinary experiences I've had because you've just got a market that's representing the food culture of Palestinian cuisine, but also Jewish cuisine from the entire Jewish culinary world, and it's incredible. And so I can find things that I recognize from, you know, my studying of Jewish food and my own family background, but also was able to taste things that I had never heard of from Jewish communities that I've just never interacted with because of where I'm from. And so from Jerusalem, we went over to Palestine, specifically the West Bank and Bethlehem, to stay at the Walled Off Hotel. If you don't know this hotel, it's a hotel that kind of sprung up overnight from Banksy, and they build themselves as having the world's worst view because you're looking right at the separation wall or whatever you want to call it. And it's an ugly a hunk of junk. Not the hotel. Hotel was actually quite lovely, but the wall. And we did a tour to learn more about the wall, the experience of Palestinian folks who live in this area and are subjected to the occupation. We went to the Aida refugee camp, which is alongside the wall and has been a refugee camp since what the Palestinians call the Nakba or the catastrophe. So this is why I walked away from that trip with even less confidence than ever before that there wouldn't be a resolution in the near future, because you have one history that looks at 1948 as one of the greatest days ever, and you've got another group of people who call it literally the Nakba, the catastrophe. So it was very impactful to hear those stories firsthand about how life is under the occupation, how it has been for all of these years, and even how my own government is apparently involved in developing the tear gas bullets. So this certainly isn't, beach vacation stuff. This is what I would argue is more important travel, especially as an American going around to other places and learning more about what our money is paying for. So like most anyone who's even remotely paying attention to what's going on, my heart aches for everything. It's truly surreal to think that we were just there relatively recently, considering everything that's going on now. And I certainly don't have the words to encapsulate and articulate how horrendous this whole situation is. And I wish I had the words for it, but there are much wiser people who you can probably get those words from. But I'm glad we went when we did, and it was an impactful trip. And to me, that's what travel should be. It shouldn't be just beach vacations. It should be something that's going to leave a mark on you. And my trip to Israel and Palestine certainly did. So after the trip to Israel and Palestine, we're back in Berlin, and I'm getting ready for my first ultramarathon attempt, which was going to be in early June in Innsbruck, Austria. Unfortunately, and apologies if you've heard the story already in the Innsbruck video or in my October video about my second ultramarathon attempt, but I got a little runner's knee about 2 weeks before the race, and I could barely walk. It was wildly painful. Now, surprisingly, by the time the race came, I was able to get through about half of it, but by the time I got even a third or so through the race, it was already pretty painful. And then I pulled myself out because, well, first of all, I wouldn't make the time limits, the time cutoffs, based on how much I was hobbling. And I didn't, even if I could have finished, I didn't want my first ultra marathon finish to be under such agony. I wanted to, enjoy it and to feel strong crossing the finish line. So I pulled myself out of that race, but still was able to get a sense of, what the course was like. It was a gorgeous course, and I would honestly go back and run it again, finishing this time, hopefully. And yeah, Innsbruck was gorgeous, and if you are a trail runner, I highly recommend giving the race a look. So then for me, it was mostly into recovery mode, which was fine because we didn't have another major race until the Berlin Marathon in late September. And in July, we were going back to the US to visit family, which is precisely what we did. But this trip, I wanted to make more of an effort to do something different, because as much as I love where I'm from and seeing family here, we tend to just kind of do the same stuff. And now that it's been like 7 years, going on 8, we just wanted to see something different, do something different as a family. So this time we went down to Ohiopyle, Pennsylvania. That's probably confusing. It's not in Ohio, it's Ohiopyle, but in Pennsylvania. And I got to run a little bit of the Great Allegheny Passage, do a little hiking on the Laurel Highlands Trail, and it's gorgeous. I mean, it's the kind of more remote nature that you can get in the US that I don't think you can quite get in at least the part of Central Europe that I'm in. That makes me appreciate the US. I just wish it was more accessible, because of course you need a car to get to these places. So that's always disappointing for me. But, when I'm in the US, I try to just accept things for the way they are in the limited time I'm there, because I don't want to be miserable. I want to enjoy my time with my family. And I had a blast running around on the Great Allegheny Passage and then hiking on the Laurel Highlands Trail. And honestly, if I had the opportunity to run more of the Gap Trail or even to run all of the Laurel Highlands Trail, I believe there is actually an ultra trail race along the Laurel Highlands Trail. I would love to do that. Then in August, back in Germany, I had my first race since hurting my knee for the ultra attempt in Innsbruck. And this was just an 18-kilometer run, but basically just straight uphill for about, I want to say, 1,100 meters in the Allgäu region of Germany. So southern Germany, it's technically in Bavaria as well. And I felt good. I was glad I only did 18 kilometers, but I felt good in that race and felt confident moving forward. But because I was going down with a group of friends and we kind of thought, why don't we just hang out in the area a little bit longer? So we did, took a couple of days off and went down to Oberstdorf, did a little bit more trail running, some hiking. I went paragliding for the first time and just had like a nice German summer experience. We walked over to this Freibergsee lake, had some beer, hung out with the dog, went stand-up paddleboarding. Again, like I was saying for February, it was a nice reminder of just how much I have right in my backyard in Germany. Then after getting back from that trip, the focus was pretty much on getting ready for the Berlin Marathon, which was in late September. And so it's just a lot of running, a lot of long runs on the weekends and during the week. Basically, whenever we could, we had to run. But it was worth it because I PR'd at the Berlin Marathon, and it was another confidence boost going into my second ultra marathon attempt that I could actually do this thing because I had no complaints with my knee through whether it was the race in Sonthofen and Allgäu or the Berlin Marathon. I felt great, felt very strong. So then going on into October, I just had a few more weeks of training before giving the ultra marathon distance my second attempt in Schwäbisch Gmünd, kind of in the same area as where the last race was in Sonthofen, but a little bit further west, I want to say. Um, and it went well. I did it. I'm done. Been done for a while now, but it was another nice little German village that certainly most, I would say all tourists aren't going to visit or have heard of. But another one of those places that when you move abroad and you live someplace for as long as we have, you start to get to see these places that even a lot of Germans themselves haven't seen. As I say in my video about the ultra marathon, it felt a little bit like a work trip, like I was down there not for pleasure, for purpose. So I don't know if I necessarily would have gone there had I not run this race. And sure, in some respect, I would have preferred that I finished the race in Innsbruck, but it happened the way it happened. I got the ultra marathon distance monkey off my back, and I'm excited to look forward to 2024. Then for the last couple months of the year, November, December, basically no travel. November was relaxing and recovering from the ultra marathon and getting myself my Zelda tattoo as my reward. So I get the tattoo, and then into late November, I get a pretty bad cold, and which really sucked because usually I'm not the one who's getting colds. And if I do, I'm like, out for a day, then I'm good. It kind of lingered for a bit, so that set me back on restarting my running program for 2024. And then December was, the first half of the month was mostly in Berlin, had a nice Hanukkah party, started to get back into running, then went to the US, had a couple more nice runs, and had a great VO2 max workout. And then at midnight that night, and here comes the health scare, I woke up around midnight, had to go discharge the contents of my stomach verbally, I guess you could say, trying to make it as not squeamish as possible for anybody who's a little watching, and passed out. And this is similar to what happened in Laos, if you heard that story in the Luan Prabang video, except this time it was a bit more severe, and I was out for, I guess, 2 to 3 minutes, and so I had that that warranted a trip to the emergency room and an overnight at the hospital while they did some tests. Basically, it sounds like just a severe episode of syncope. I'm. It's just fancy medical term for you passed out, you lost consciousness, and they basically the tests they did were to make sure it wasn't anything more serious and they were happy with the results. I will have to do more follow-up things in the near future, but so far, so good. And now just kind of counting down the days in 2023 before moving on to 2024. And so I'll talk a little bit about what's in store there so far. I think I might maybe have mentioned before, either on the channel or on my Instagram, that we will be going to Kenya at the end of January into early February, where I'll be staying at a safari camp in Tsavo National Park, working with this safari camp on creating some content for them and for myself, and hopefully because what I want to do, and maybe I should do something about my whole mission with this channel, is I'm really trying to emphasize local storytelling. So I want to be merely the vehicle by which people are able to share their stories. I don't, the whole travel vloggy thing where you always have the camera on yourself and you parachute into a place and you're just talking. Like, these videos aren't really my jam. And so I'll be doing that in Tsavo National Park, spending a little bit of time in Nairobi. We have a friend who lives there. And then spending a week in Iten at a running camp. Some people might be familiar with this if you're a runner. If not, basically this is a part of Kenya where a lot of the elite runners train or are from. So we'll be spending a week there being the worst runners around. We're like healthy, average, perhaps above average runners in our little world, but then surely in Iten we will be getting past a lot. Lapped, and lapped. It'll be lovely. Can't wait. But I'll also be interviewing a lot of folks there about, the culture of running in Kenya, especially in this area. So I'll be interviewing a lot of folks up there as well. And yeah, creating lots of stuff early on in 2024. You're going to get lots of Kenyan reels and posts and videos on all my channels. And so I hope you're into that, because that's what you're going to get. And then in terms of training for a race, the first one that we have finally officially signed up for is in Western Turkey. And I'll be doing, I think it was like a 43-kilometer distance with some elevation, with the hope of increasing over the months to possibly trying something in the 60-kilometer range, and just kind of increasing and seeing how I feel, what I like, and maybe I'll end up wanting to settle around a 30-kilometer some distance, which is a distance I like because, I'm not an elite runner, and I like doing those races in the 30-kilometer distance because it's more than a half marathon that you feel like, yeah, I really did something, but it's not so much that you're just killing your body that you're going to have to recover for days and weeks, and that, you're traveling, you can actually like do things where you are and enjoy them. You don't have to be out on the race for the entire time. So we'll see. We're looking at some other things to do. Somebody had actually commented on one of the videos about a trail festival in Poland. That certainly got my interest. But for the most part, things are outside of March are still, in flux, relatively up in the air. So if you have some suggestions of races or things that I should really check out, or stories that you really want to hear or see, leave a comment, let me know, and perhaps you'll get it. Anyway, that's enough of me sitting on a floor with now ice cold coffee yammering away. So yeah, thanks for following along here on the YouTube channel, on Instagram, whatever it may be. I do really appreciate the support, and I'm looking forward to telling more stories and doing more hard things in 2024.